I shouldn't tell you this, not like this, not with my voice this close to your ear. But the first time I realized he was watching me, I felt both safer and more in danger than I had in my entire life. I remember the ordinary things first, because that's how my memory protects me. The tin rattle of the bus on Monday mornings, the stale coffee that tasted like burnt almonds, the way the office carpet swallowed high heels like soft moss. I was 22, finishing my marketing degree and working part-time at a small advertising agency tucked between a tailor's shop and a florist who never learned how to water plants. We sold stories for other people's products, lipsticks and window cleaners, and a local chain of bakeries that insisted every croissant be called moonfold. I liked the neatness of market research, the logic of A/B tests, the comfort of brand guidelines. I liked being useful. I liked disappearing into data so that my body, my face, my voice could rest. The agency was run by men who wore suits in July and spoke in bullets. They liked words that sounded like metal, conversion, leverage, scale. There were 5 of them and 1 of me on most days, and I learned quickly how to take notes with my head slightly bowed, how to look attentive without being inviting. You learn this if you are a woman surrounded by men who belong to the room more than you do. You learn to make yourself a fog. Present, shapeless, passing through without clinging to anyone's skin. And then there was him. The observer. The one who stood a little back from the crowd at meetings. He wasn't my boss, not directly. He worked with the client accounts that actually paid us on time. His tie was always loose, like a promise he never fully meant to keep. He had polite hands. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. His fingers never touched the papers he passed me, only the air above them, and when he reached for the door he left room for anyone else who might wish to leave first. He was married, I heard, to a woman whose name sounded like a flower. He had a daughter who liked to draw horses, according to the photos stuck to his monitor with yellowed tape. He never flirted. He never tried to be funny. He never stood too close. He was water at the edge of the room, cool and quiet, reflecting whatever light happened to be around him. And still, whenever I looked up from a spreadsheet, I found him watching me. Not hungry, not searching. Admiring, like someone looking at a painting and trying to understand why it makes the heart do that little leap to the left. The first time I felt it, really felt it, was a Tuesday in September when the city's heat unbuttoned itself and let us breathe again. I was presenting social metrics to our lead copywriter, showing him how the bakery's posts performed better on rainy days. It was small, silly data, but I loved it. The way clouds could pull cravings up through people's throats, make them want butter and sugar and something warm in their hands. The copywriter was taking none of it seriously. He kept joking about how we should literally bribe the weather, and everyone laughed, and then I looked up and met the observer's eyes across the room. He was half hidden behind a pillar, as if he'd stepped there to let someone pass and then forgotten to move. The meeting buzzed around him, and in the middle of all that noise, he was still. His gaze felt like a coat I hadn't realized I needed. I straightened, slowed down. I spoke more clearly, not to the room, but to that quiet distance where he stood. It should have ended there. A glance like a tether, the nonsense of possibility shrinking back into the ordinary weather of an ordinary day. But once you've felt friction, even soft and polite, you can't unfeel it. You start to sense where the room rubs against you, where the air warms. I noticed him more. How he always left meetings last. Not to linger but to ensure everyone else had what they needed. How he wore the same watch every day. A simple face, no numbers, a small scratch at the edge, as if time itself had once insulted him and he'd learned to live with the scar. I noticed his patience with interns, his steady voice on calls, the way he never told a story about himself unless asked. And I noticed myself noticing. That was the more dangerous part. You see, I had a rule. Life first, feelings later. I didn't have the luxury of chaos. I was paying for my own classes, saving for my own life, sending money home to a mother who never quite said thank you but always sent back photos of the tomatoes she grew in the yard. I had a boyfriend on paper. A kind, practical person who paid attention to weather warnings and never forgot an umbrella. With him, love felt like a list we were working through. Steady, sensible, foldable like laundry. Sometimes I pretended it was enough. Sometimes it actually was. Until the day admiration entered the room like a draft slipped under a locked door. He just watched and admired. Do you understand how clean that is? How soft? There is no touch in admiration, no crime you can point at, nothing you can confess to without sounding dramatic. And still it changed the temperature of my days. I started to arrive at the office earlier, sitting near the window where the morning light made a gold river across the carpet. I worked more carefully, as if my spreadsheets had suddenly become portraits. I was not dressing differently, not at first, but I started to choose the neckline that made me feel like I'd slept well, the lipstick color that made me look like I had a secret even if I didn't. I wasn't doing it for him, I told myself. I was doing it for the part of me that liked being admired by someone who never asked for anything. On Thursdays our team met in the smaller conference room with the slow door. The observer sat across from me, diagonally, like an echo of a seat rather than a person in one. He had a habit of clicking his pen once, just once, at the start of a meeting and then never again. I began to anticipate that click the way some people anticipate a favorite song. When I spoke, he listened. That word feels too thin for what he did. He listened like a lake listens to sky, accepting the clouds without trying to change them, showing you what you've said so you can see it better. You found a pattern in the bakery data? He asked once, after everyone else had wandered out. His voice was careful, as if handling thin glass. Rain keeps people online longer. Longer and later, I said. They scroll past midnight. Like they're looking for a second day. Just a quieter one. He smiled, but not with his mouth. Make the client a chart, he said, and then, almost as an afterthought, you see things other people don't. It's helpful. Helpful. Not pretty. Not brilliant. Not exceptional. Helpful, like I was a tool well used. You would think that would not burn. But I felt a heat low in my chest, the kind of warmth that makes night air feel friendlier than it is. After that, I began to keep a list on my phone of small details that seemed like nothing until I wrote them down. The bent corner on his notebook, the way he answered questions by first breathing in, as if borrowing a second from the future, the smooth indent under his left eye that appeared when he concentrated. I added things about myself too, as if to balance the ledger. The freckle on my thumb I never noticed before, the ache in my shoulders on Sundays, the strange relief of hearing the office elevator ding open when I was the only one there. This is how the crack formed. Not like a loud breaking, but like a line drawn gently across ice. No one else heard it. I almost didn't. And then he said my name in a hallway empty of noise, and the sound of it, my own name, made me feel like there was a door in my life I had walked past 100 times without knowing it could open. It should have stayed in that hallway. Names float and then they fall. But later that week he sent an email that wasn't about work. It wasn't about anything really. It was a link to a study on how people buy pastries when they're lonely. Thought you might like this, he wrote. It sounds like how you describe the late-night scrolling. Then, almost as if he regretted sending it, he added, Hope I'm not overstepping. I stared at the screen for so long my coffee went cold. Overstepping. What step is an idea? What step is a link? I wrote back, This is fascinating, and I signed my name, and my fingers trembled while doing something so ordinary they should not have trembled at all. Admiration is polite. Doesn't demand. It just waits and watches to see who you become around it. I became careful, then careful, full of care for tiny rituals that felt like prayers, turning my phone over on my desk to hide the buzzing, closing Slack before I opened his email, waiting precisely 9 minutes before responding so it looked like I had only just found his message in the flow of my day. We never wrote anything you could print and frown at. We wrote about work until the edges of work blurred, about habits until habits tasted like confession. We wrote like people telling the weather to each other. It's raining here. Is it raining there? Do you ever want to walk without an umbrella just to feel something? And still, when I caught him looking at me from the edge of a meeting, I felt that coat again, the soft warmth of being seen without being seized. He didn't ask for my number. He didn't ask for my time. He didn't ask, but he asked, the way an empty chair asks you to sit. The night everything shifted. The sky was doing that pink-blue bruise that happens just before streetlights turn on. I had stayed late to adjust a campaign calendar. He had stayed late because he always stayed late. The office, stripped of people, made new sounds. Desks creaked like boats. The copy machine muttered its own loneliness. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, that unhurried rhythm like someone counting careful money. He paused at my desk. He didn't lean, didn't hover. He kept his hands at his sides. He said my name like a question and then like an answer. Would you? He started and stopped. I looked up. His eyes were not the eyes of a man about to do something wrong. They were the eyes of someone who had spent a long time practicing restraint and had only just realized how tired he was. There's a cafe on the corner, he said. I've been trying to break my habit of working through dinner. Would you join me? To keep me honest. Honest. It's a terrible, beautiful word. I said yes because what I heard wasn't a date, wasn't an invitation to cross anything, just a small rescue from another hour alone with spreadsheets. We walked out into the blunt evening. The cafe smelled like sugar thinking about fire. We sat by the window. We didn't talk about the study or the bakery or the client who always said, touch base like a threat. We talked about the horses his daughter drew, each one with a different name and a different secret. I told him about my mother's tomatoes, how she whispered to them like they were shy children. He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that doesn't belong to anyone else, that will always sound like that person and no one else forever. We were there 40 minutes, maybe 50. We left separately. When I got home, I sat on my bed without turning on the lights and listened to the sound of my heartbeat like a stranger knocking on my door. Nothing had happened. Nothing had happened. I must have whispered that to myself 20 times. Nothing had happened. Which is not the same as saying nothing had begun. I wish I could tell you it ended there. I wish I could say we admired and watched and grew old and that was all. But curiosity is a tide. Doesn't ask your permission. It just returns again and again, until even the rocks begin to yield. The next week there was another email, and then another cafe. And the shape of those evenings drew a thin outline around my days. My boyfriend texted good night. I texted back kind words and felt my chest answer with silence. In the office, the observer stayed the observer, nothing more, nothing less. But in the space between him and me the air learned a new language. Almost. I used to believe that wrong things announced themselves loudly. I thought betrayal wore red, that it knocked over lamps, that it broke the dishes and left footprints. I was not ready for how quietly it can enter, how it can slip into your pocket like a folded note and change the weight of your body without changing your shape at all. The last Thursday of October, we lingered in the smaller conference room under the tired hum of the lights. The team left. The door closed like a secret being careful with itself. He didn't sit. I didn't either. We stood with the table between us like a line drawn by a nervous teacher. I think, he said, and then stopped. He put his pen down and its click sounded too loud. I think I look forward to our conversations too much. I felt my throat narrow. I felt every sensible part of me, every rule I had ever made, gather like guards at the gates. We haven't done anything wrong, I said, and it came out more like a question than I wanted it to. Not yet, he said, and for a moment there was no air in the room at all. Then he added, so softly I had to lean forward to hear, that's what scares me. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the building a vacuum cleaner coughed. He did not move toward me. I did not move toward him. We stood like people at the edge of a pool, both of us pretending we had come to look at our reflections. I went home and put my phone face down on my dresser and lay awake until 3. His words ran across my ceiling like thin lines of rain. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. And the question that lived under those words, curled and waiting. When? I promise you I meant to be good. I promise you I believed I could be. But goodness is not a wall. It's a rope. You hold on until your hands ache, and then you loosen your grip just for a second, just for relief, and in that second you slip. And this is where the story turns, quietly, like a page you didn't realize you were ready to read, with my breath caught in my mouth and the taste of sugar and coffee still on my tongue, when the calendar said November and the city finally remembered how to be cold, when a meeting ran late and a train was missed and a decision, or something that felt like one, followed us both out into the dark, into the night where windows glowed and people went home and I did not. I did not go home. I went with him. And the door closed. We didn't touch. Isn't that the strange thing to say, first and foremost? We didn't touch. We stood in the kind of quiet that happens after a room exhales, in a hotel lobby that smelled like clean sheets and a lemon that had once been real. He had 2 drinks in his hands, 1 water, 1 tea. As if that could make this more innocent, like we were common travelers sharing a bench, like we were not standing at the known edge of our own restraint. But here is what did happen, and it is, I think, worse in a way that is smaller. He handed me the tea, and our fingers didn't meet, and still I felt heat climb my wrist as if his touch had traveled through air. He chose a seat by the window. I sat in the chair opposite him. The lobby was almost empty. A television above the bar murmured weather. A traveler in a pilled sweater asked the clerk about wake-up calls, and the clerk said 6 a.m. in the exact tone of someone saying, "I understand. Of course you have to leave before the sun." He looked tired. Not the good kind of tired after work well done. The kind that comes from setting heavy things down and realizing your arms are still shaped to carry them. I almost told him to go home. I almost told myself. Instead I said, "We're not good people tonight." And the sentence surprised me with how steady it sounded. He set the tea on the table and watched the steam write brief messages in the air. "I haven't been a good person for a while," he said softly. "I've been careful. And I mistook that for goodness. Careful. Such a polite word for a nearly. I wanted to argue, to fold the night back into its envelope. "We haven't done anything," I said, then felt how false it sounded. We had done everything but. And sometimes the not doing is the doing. He told me about his house like it was a story happening to someone else. A kitchen table with a crack down the middle that never widened, never closed. A child's schedule pinned to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. The woman he loved once, whom he still loved in a shape he didn't recognize. "We talk like roommates who respect each other," he said. "We never fight because there's nothing to win." I didn't tell him about my boyfriend beyond the fact of him. I didn't tell him how I sometimes looked at our life and felt like I was leaning against a fence in a field that had no end. I didn't tell him how guilt already tasted metallic on my tongue like a coin. Instead I asked a safer question that wasn't safe at all. "What do you want from me?" He looked at me then, really looked, and I felt a line draw itself across my life like a fault discovering it was a fault. "I want to keep admiring you," he said, and then, breaking the sentence open, "I want to know you. And I am afraid of what that will make me." The television changed to sports. Someone laughed across the lobby and the sound floated over to us, light as confetti, wrong in its happiness. Tea cooled. I wrapped my hands around it to feel the last of its warmth. "We could choose," I said, and the "we" felt like a new country. "We could say this is the furthest we go." "We could," he agreed. His voice stepped carefully. "Will we?" I didn't answer. Not because the answer was no, not because it was yes, but because I realized that asking the question had already moved us. I felt the night gather around us like a curtain and imagined what a passerby would see. 2 colleagues keeping warm in a lobby, nothing between them but air. Nothing between them but air that had learned to carry heat. This is the part where a simple thing happened that changed everything. Not a kiss. Not a key card slid across polished wood. Not a confession shouted to the ceiling as if asking permission from the lights. He told me a story. He told me that when he was a boy his father took him fishing on a lake no one went to. Not because the fish were big but because the quiet was. He told me how his father had taught him to untangle lines without pulling so hard they cut. You can't rush a knot, his father told him, and that seemed like wisdom at the time. Sometimes you wait for the water to help you. And then he looked at me and said, I've been waiting for water. There are sentences that are keys even when they lead nowhere. That one unlocked something in me I had been guarding so well I didn't know it was there. I wanted to be water. I wanted to be the element that could help a knot soften. I wanted to be more than helpful, and I wanted to remain good. And between those desires lay a bridge made only of breath. So I breathed, and he breathed, and the night watched us, and we crossed it. Not with hands. Not with mouths. With truth. Whispered so lightly the words barely weighed what they meant. He said, I think of you when it rains. I said, I think of you when the elevator dings. He said, I measure my days by whether or not you write. I said, I rehearse my sentences before I send them. He said, I don't want to ruin your life. I said, and it scared me to hear myself say it. What if I ruin my own? We didn't touch. But I felt touched. Isn't that the strangest confession? That someone's restraint can be a hand. That someone's not doing can leave fingerprints. When we left the hotel lobby, the sidewalks shone like they had been polished by the souls of people who had walked away from themselves. He walked me to the corner. Not close. Not far. He stopped and turned to me and said, I can't be the first to break this. And I heard the word break, and I hated it because it made what we had sound like a plate thrown in anger instead of a thin glass set down too hard by accident. I can't, he said again, and I knew he was telling me he would follow if I led, and that knowledge landed in my chest with the weight of a quiet bell. I understand, I said. My voice wasn't steady. You won't be. I slept like a person barely pretending to. In the morning the city looked new and innocent and unknowing, like a child who has not yet learned the word consequence. At the office we were chilly and polite. We didn't linger. We didn't use the small conference room. A meeting was postponed. Another replaced it. At lunch, I sat alone with my plastic fork and stared at a salad I didn't want. My phone buzzed once, then again. I didn't look. The rope of goodness burned my palms. After work, I didn't go to the cafe. I didn't go home either. I walked without choosing where my feet would take me, and they decided I should stand outside a bookstore with a yellow awning. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass like someone checking for fever. Inside, a woman argued with a clerk about a return policy. Behind me, a bus sighed to a stop and gathered the night into its open mouth. I thought about how easy it would be to become someone else if you climbed on the wrong bus on purpose. I thought about how the city would keep moving no matter what we did. When I finally turned toward the subway, he was across the street. Not waiting. Just there like a coincidence wearing his face. He didn't call out. He didn't lift a hand. He just looked at me, and not from the edge of a room but from the edge of a choice. And in that long, almost empty moment the world rearranged itself around what I wanted. I wanted him. Not the body of him. The mind of him. The quiet of him. The way he watched without taking. The way he listened without making me smaller. I wanted the permission of our conversations. The thin gold line of attention that made me visible to myself. I wanted to be the person he imagined when he admired me. And I wanted to stay the person I had worked so hard to become. I wanted contradiction, and I wanted to be forgiven for that want. He stepped off the curb. I stepped forward. The island in the middle of the street held us like a tiny country without a flag. If you want me to go, he said, say the word and I will. Don't go, I whispered. It felt like choosing salt after months of water. He nodded once, as if we had agreed on the price of something that could not be bought. We found a bar with booths so high the world felt reduced to our breath. We ordered nothing and then everything and then nothing again. We talked about the bakery like it was a safe code. We talked about childhood fears that had learned to change clothes and call themselves responsibilities. I told him that when I couldn't sleep as a little girl I'd catalog everything blue in my room. The lamp, the ribbon, the sea on a postcard, and that sometimes I still did that now. blue scarf, blue pen, the blue minute between 5:13 and 5:14 a.m. when the sky seems to consider whether it will forgive you. He told me he had begun to dream of water, not oceans, lake. He said he woke with the taste of its silence in his mouth. We almost kissed. Do you need me to say it like that? The almost was a body of its own. He leaned. The booth's leather cracked like a warning. We stopped. We laughed, not from joy but from fear, like people at the end of a movie who can breathe again because the danger has been contained by credits. Except ours didn't roll. The danger came home with us and kept folding itself into our pillows. The next week, lines blurred so gently I could not tell you the moment they vanished. A brush of his sleeve against mine in a hallway nobody walked except us. The way he said my name on the phone and then repeated it, softer, as if the first one had been a rehearsal. The time I sent him an article at midnight because I needed him to know what my mind was doing when my body was pretending to be asleep. He wrote back, awake too. He added nothing else, and the blank became a place we could both enter. I told myself stories. You can stay in admiration forever. You're strong enough. You like the idea of him more than the man, and ideas don't break rings or hearts. I repeated these until they felt like a lullaby, and still I woke with a pit in my stomach, the exact shape of a decision. And then the storm. Not outside. Inside the office, inside us. A client panicked over a campaign that wasn't performing. The partners blamed each other. The observer's patience thinned to a thread. I watched him carry that weight. I wanted to lift it, not by doing his work for him, but by offering the relief that comes from being known. He came to my desk late, after the anger had exhausted itself and turned into extra meetings. Walk, he asked, just one word, and I nodded. We walked in the kind of rain that never admits it's rain, just mist that settles on skin like a decision already made. We didn't use our umbrellas. The city swam around us. He told me he was tired of being perfect to people who didn't remember he was human. I told him I was tired of being useful. He stopped at a crossing and looked at me with the stunned expression of someone who has found a mirror in a place where there should be only wall. If we do this, he said, and the word this vibrated like a bridge cable in wind, we will not be allowed to say we didn't know. We will not be allowed to pretend we slipped. He nodded. My hair stuck to my neck. Taxi hissed past. The light changed. We didn't move. I could live with being wrong, I whispered. I don't think I can live with never knowing. He closed his eyes like a man at prayer. When he opened them, he was someone I recognized and someone I didn't. We went to his car, not touching. We drove to a street with trees that held their leaves like stubborn hands. We sat. We didn't talk. The windows fogged lightly like breath learning to write. And then, at last, a touch. Not a mouth. His hand on mine, just that, as gentle as admiration had always been, but real enough to remind me I had a body. He didn't move our hands anywhere. He simply covered my fingers with his and let his palm be warm. I closed my eyes and felt the pulse in my wrist tap against his skin like someone quietly knocking from inside a locked room. It was not graphic. It was not a romance novel. It was two people who had been careful so long they had forgotten how to be. It was the smallest crossing of a line that carried the weight of an ocean. When he let go, my hand felt colder than air had ever been. He said nothing, and in that silence I heard everything. The guilt, the thrill, the relief, the fear. I breathed and it hurt. We didn't go to a room. We didn't even kiss. But something in the world tilted toward aftermath. I went home and stood under the shower until the water ran cool, as if the heat belonged to someone else. I watched a drop hang from my elbow and fall and thought, this is what we are now. People who have done a small thing that enlarges every shadow. The next morning, the office looked exactly the same and completely different, like a childhood street revisited. He nodded at me, professional. I nodded back. We worked. The bakery wanted a holiday campaign shaped like generosity. I wrote copy about cinnamon and memory. I wrote as if goodness could be baked. He approved the decks. Our emails were smooth, our messages clean. We were both very good at this, at making our sin look like discipline. But inside me the lake deepened. I dreamed of water. I woke and tasted its quiet. And now, you can hear how my voice changes here, can't you? I'm slowing because I don't want to reach the sentence where I tell you that no matter how quietly we entered this, the door we closed behind us still made a sound. Someone heard. Not a common someone. A woman who notices details for a living. The receptionist. She saw us leave at the same time one night and returned separately, stiff with the effort of pretending not to have been together. She didn't gossip. She didn't tell. She simply looked at me the next morning with a kindness that felt like a warning. I carried that look all day. I carried it into evening. I carried it to the place where we had learned to meet the version of ourselves we weren't sure we liked. I told him about the look. He nodded. His hand found mine the way a tired traveler finds home on a dark street. We could stop, he said. His voice made the offer sincerely, like a glass of water extended to a person who can no longer walk. We could, I said, and the words were true the way a door is true. It exists. You can open it. You can close it. But whatever you do, you remember the weight of it forever. His phone lit the inside of the car like a small, artificial moon. A message from a name I didn't read. He turned it face down. He said, I don't know who I am with you, but I like him better than the one I am without you. Guilt bit my throat. Thrill ran through it after. These two are cousins, you know. They share a face in certain light. I wanted to be good. I wanted to be water. I wanted to be forgiven. I wanted to be chosen. He chose me with the way he looked at our joined hands, and I chose him with the way I didn't pull mine away. The car ticked as the engine cooled. Somewhere a dog barked like an alarm that would not stop until morning. He asked me, this is the turn, the hinge, if I would come away with him for one night. Not far, he said quickly, as if the distance were the sin. Just away from the watching. So we can hear what the quiet has to say. I said I would think about it, but in my chest a yes rang like a clear bell. We chose a weekend that made sense for nobody. We chose a place that meant nothing to either of us so it could mean only itself. We agreed to text once about logistics and never again about the plan, as if secrecy could make the wrong less wrong. And when the day came near, the world did not crack open and warn us. The sun rose like it always does. The city did what cities do. We packed small bags. We told lies that were not ambitious, only ordinary. We met where strangers meet. And the story that I have to tell you now, the one I am almost out of breath to reach, begins with a key card that did, in the end, slide across polished wood, and with a door that swung open on a room that smelled like sleep and bleach, and with a silence so loud I could hear nothing else. Not the trains, not my better self, not the voice of the girl I had been who believed goodness could be a wall you could build high enough and strong enough to keep out every kind of weather. I stepped inside. He followed. And the latch caught. We didn't promise anything. Isn't that strange? People think love requires vows. Maybe it does later. Maybe it always should. But in that narrow room with its polite art and its carpet that turned footprints into soft clouds, we didn't vow. We didn't plan. We simply lay there and tried to become used to our new weight. When I left to go to the bathroom, I stood at the sink and stared at my face as if it belonged to a younger sister I wanted to warn. I washed my hands twice even though they were clean. I pressed my palms to my cheeks to feel the heat and told myself I was still me, that I had not turned into a stranger in the time it takes for a kettle to boil. And then I asked the question that will not leave me, the one that still circles like a hawk when I walk to work. Was I wrong? Or was I just human? When I opened the door, he was sitting up, elbows on knees, face in his hands. The watch stared at me from the table, blind and knowing. I don't want to be someone I hate, he said. I don't want you to be either. I don't, I said, and I meant it. And I also knew how thin those words are when the world asks them to carry much. We dressed slowly, handing each other silence like it was fragile. When we looked at each other fully clothed, we looked like colleagues again. It was almost funny how costumes work. It was almost cruel. We left separately. In the elevator, a woman with a suitcase smiled at me and said, "Long day." I nodded because it was the truest thing I could answer. On the sidewalk, the cold felt like permission to keep my body close to itself. I walked to the train and thought about blue things. The scarf in my bag, the wet sky, the minutes between one station and the next. I went home and sat on the floor with my back against the bed because chairs felt too ambitious. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just listened to the new quiet. The aftermath was not dramatic. That's another myth we tell ourselves so we can believe we will recognize the moment we become someone else. There were no fireworks. There was laundry. There were emails. There was the click of his pen at the start of Thursday's meeting. Just once, in that dear, familiar way. There was the receptionist's soft look, which she didn't aim at me. Not exactly, more at the air around me, as if asking it to be kind. The guilt moved in like an uninvited roommate. It ate my cereal. Borrowed my sweater. It left hair in the drain. It spoke quietly while I brushed my teeth, while I answered texts, while I looked into the eyes of the people I cared about and tried not to flinch at my reflection in their pupils. The thrill lived there too, sleepover style, giddy and awake at 3 a.m., whispering, "Remember the way he said your name? Remember the way your hand fit inside his? Remember the relief of the decision finally being made?" The two of them argued gently in the kitchen of my body. I tried to be a good host to neither. Was I wrong? Or was I just human? The question woke me and tucked me in, fed me and starved me. I thought about the stories we sell, the moonfold croissants, the careful claims our clients make about who they are. I thought about how narratives are just choices arranged in a pleasing order. I thought about how mine was messy, how it refused to put the right choice at the right time and call it growth. He and I didn't meet again like that for a while. Not because we didn't want to, but because the quiet told us to wait. We still saw each other, of course. Offices do not keep secrets. They only keep schedules. We still wrote, though less than before, and what we wrote was both more honest and more cautious, a paradox we lived inside like a small room with clean sheets. He sent me a photo of the lake he had visited on a Sunday alone. It was gray and still. "No fish," the caption read. But I learned something about knots. I stared at the picture until my phone dimmed. People began to notice nothing. Isn't that peculiar? They noticed nothing at all. We had not exploded our world. We had dented it. Dents go unnoticed until a certain light hits them. I went to dinner with my boyfriend and laughed at the right places and meant some of it. I looked across the table and tried to measure the distance honestly. He is good, I told myself. He is kind. He will not punish you for not being tragic about what you feel. Why are we so cruel to good men in stories? Why do we make them villains because our hearts are messy? If this were a movie, this is where I would tell you I chose. I would pick a side. The lake or the fence, the watch with its scratch or the umbrella that opens right when rain begins. I would confess to courage and accept the consequences, or confess to cowardice and accept the dull peace. But life keeps running long after the credits would have rolled. We lived in the middle, where there is no soundtrack. We lived in the ache. One afternoon months later, he knocked on the frame of my doorless office. He held a brown paper bag like an offering. "I brought you something unwise," he said, and his smile was small. Inside the bag, a croissant from the bakery, still warm. Moonfold. I laughed because pain makes a person laugh sometimes. He leaned against the wall across from me, hands in pockets, and watched me take a bite. Butter broke under my teeth with a sound like tissue paper tearing. Closed my eyes. He whispered, so softly it might have been a memory speaking. "Does it taste like regret?" "It tastes like rain," I said. I swallowed. "And like being loved in the quiet." He straightened. His eyes warmed in that way that isn't a heat so much as a clearing. "I don't know what we are," he told me, "but I know I admire you still. I know I will, even if we never." "I know," I said, cutting the sentence off because sometimes the end of a sentence is a cliff and the only way not to fall is not to finish it. He nodded, as if I had accepted an apology he hadn't offered yet. He left. I licked butter from my fingers and thought about water. I thought about my mother's tomatoes, how she whispered to them and expected them to be better because of it. I wondered if tenderness counts as goodness when it is applied to the wrong soil. I am telling you this now because secrets grow heavier the longer they stay inside. I am telling you because I think there is more than one way to be guilty, and I have discovered a few. I am telling you because maybe you have stood on the island in the middle of the street, not waving, not sinking, and thought, if I move I drown, and if I don't I still drown. I am telling you because I want to know if the world has a place for our kind of mistake. The kind made slowly, carefully, with eyes open and hands shaking. Was I wrong? Or was I just human? I still don't know. Sometimes I sit by my window and wait for the elevator ding I can hear from the building across the street. It's faint, but it's there. A tiny bell that means someone has arrived at a floor they wanted and someone else is still traveling. I drink tea that cools too fast. I list the blue things. The sky behind a contrail, a pen cap, a bruise blooming on my shin because the world remains clumsy even when you learn to be careful. I think about the lake and how he said there were no fish. I think about how maybe the point of certain waters is not to catch anything but to listen. I have not told you the end because there isn't one. The story lives in the present tense, in the quiet hallways where two people stand with a table between them and decide, again and again, whether to be good or to be honest about how far from good they have drifted. The story lives in my hands when they hover over my keyboard and choose words that do no harm, and in my chest when the city rains and I feel my heart lean toward the idea of a person and then sternly call itself back. If you've stayed with me through this secret, if you've heard the low hum of my fear and the high, thin note of my want and the river sound of my guilt running under every sentence, don't let it end here. Subscribe now at Secret Woman Stories because I have more confessions to share. Secrets even darker than this one.